So good morning, everyone. My name's James Baker. I'm a Solution Engineering Manager for Flexera Software, and I'm joined here with my partner and colleague today, Kent.
Yeah, my name is Kent Agerlund, and I'm from CT Global, a global consulting firm with, we actually have a colleague here in Holland as well, and in most of Europe and in the US. We've been partnering up with Flexera for the last 5-6 years, and especially on the whole CSI, SVM security part. So I'm here to give a few demos.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start off with a presentation. And really what we're going to discuss today is bracing for impact, because it's really around the velocity of vulnerabilities and how that's impacting organizations and enterprises today. So I'm going to run through a short presentation and then hand over to Kent, who's going to show you some of the solutions that can help address these challenges. So software is eating the world. So what do I mean by that? Well, actually, on my trip to Holland last night, I came from a home. My home has got a device inside it that I can control the temperature on from my iPhone. I got into my car. My car was telling me it's due for a service, which isn't good news. It means I need to spend more money. But it's driven by software. As I got to the airport and went through the boarding, the check-in, and had my passport scanned, all of these things are driven by software. Software is absolutely everywhere. It really is eating the world. And it's a $350 billion industry, and it powers every company. Absolutely every company out there are all powered by software today. Now, I mentioned this control unit in my house that I use. I love this. So if if I'm coming back from somewhere and no one's at home, I can turn on the heating so when I get home it's warm and I'm not cold. But this is really around the Internet of Things and this world of now connected devices. All of these different connected devices, again, driven by software. And IoT itself is going to be a market worth nearly $17 trillion. So it's massive. It's only getting more, it's getting bigger, more software is coming. But the industry has a dirty little secret. The supply chain, from actually those who supply software, to those who actually buy and consume software, well, that supply chain is one of the most dysfunctional supply chains we see in the world. For an organization who makes any other product, let's say it's a can of tuna. Well, everything from catching that tuna to taking that tuna refrigerated to a factory where it's processed, packed in tins, to then shipped out to distributors on lorries, ready to actually be sold by supermarkets. This stuff just works. It works well. It works well because people have been improving these supply chains over years. The problem is with software supply chains, it's dysfunctional. People don't know how much software they have in their environments. Can you believe that? If I asked you how much toothpaste that you had left, you'd have a fair idea. At least it'd be easy to check. You just look at the tube and check. People can't see this in their software estates. It's so common that people just don't even have visibility of what's installed. Now, to make matters worse, it's not just about what's installed. It's around knowing what's vulnerable in enterprises and organizations as well. And this is a massive challenge. So where we help from Flexera's side, well, we're reimagining the way that software is bought, sold, managed, and secured. And that's firmly the space we fit in. We work on both the side of the suppliers of software, but also those who consume software. And we're really trying to help address these challenges with this dysfunctional supply chain. So I mentioned vulnerabilities. Now, the storm is now. I'm sure you've all heard in the news the likes of the Petya exploits, WannaCry, for example, as well. These are costing organizations millions of pounds in terms of damage. So I just want to pick out, actually, the WannaCry breach, which was back in 12th of May. Has anyone not heard of WannaCry? Okay, so WannaCry affected organizations around the world. It was over 230,000 computers over 150 countries. And the impact of this was massive. Now, I'm based in England, And in England, we have a national health service. This is the public hospitals that you go, we pay tax for, and it enables me to go and get health care. Now, through this exploit, ransomware was actually put on the devices. It meant that hospitals actually had to cancel operations unless they were paying fines in bitcoins to actually get these computers and devices back online again. Now, this was actually caused by a breach to a vulnerable application. In this case, it was Microsoft, the Microsoft platform. But the patch was already available to fix this. The patch was already out there. The problem is that people weren't aware that that patch was there. It was a broken process again, a dysfunctional process. Now, the impact of not keeping up with patching software and removing these vulnerabilities, it's not just about the downtime and the cost to the organization and the loss of reputation and the brand issues and that type of damage. It's also new regulations are coming in. So the NIS Directive and Trade Secrets Directive, they've already been there. But next year, a new regulation is coming, GDPR. Now, for GDPR, what this means for any European company or anyone who actually processes transactions through Europe, so even if you're a US company but you process transactions through Europe, if you're not found to address security challenges sufficiently, you can lose 4% of your revenue. Now, 4% of any organization's revenue is absolutely massive. So it's not just the impact and the downtime and the problems it causes, but there's more heavier fines coming as well if you can't get on top of these challenges. So at Flexera, we have what we call the Secunia Research team. And they do annual research on vulnerabilities that they're seeing in end enterprises. And last year, there was over 17,000 vulnerabilities identified, over 2,000 products. I think the bottom point there is really important as well, that 80% of those vulnerabilities have patches available. It's a matter of understanding, well, firstly, what's vulnerable? Is there a patch available? And how do I know that? And how do I get out there to address, that vulnerability in my organization? The other interesting fact is, although Microsoft typically has the market share in terms of applications in enterprises and organizations, with a 67% market share here, most of the vulnerabilities are actually happening in the third-party applications. By third-party, I mean non-Microsoft applications. So we see 77% of those applications which are non-Microsoft, which have all these vulnerabilities. Now, the reason I think that's important is when I speak to companies, typically they have a pretty good process in place for managing Microsoft patching. Perhaps they're using WSUS or a similar process to make sure on Patch Tuesday or current branch releases that things are patched from Microsoft. But we see this big gap here of these non-Microsoft applications still not being patched, still not being managed. Now, in terms of security layers, well, there's lots of different layers to security to become secure for your organization. The area where we focus, and is really what I want to talk today, is around some foundational layer areas of security, and that's patch management and vulnerability assessment. Because actually, if you're addressing this blue piece at the bottom, you're getting most of the work done there. It's not complete. Yeah, you need multiple layers of security, but it's a very important step in the right direction to making sure your organization is secure. So the reason that's an important step is if you have a vulnerable application, it will enable someone or a team of people to potentially exploit those vulnerabilities. Typically, the high criticality ones we see, these can be exploited remotely. That means they don't have to be in your environment. They can be sitting somewhere in their bedroom, on their laptop, hacking into your systems to exploit a vulnerability. If you can patch the actual application at source, so address the vulnerability actually on the application itself, you have removed the problem from your organization. It's no longer there, the application is no longer vulnerable, it can no longer be exploited. But again, we talked about this dysfunctional supply chain, and we see dysfunction within organizations as well. Security, they typically do a pretty good job of identifying where vulnerabilities are. And then operations, they're the guys that have to, and guys and girls that actually have to address those vulnerabilities, that need to patch those applications. Again, we see this disconnect between these two teams, where they typically work in silos, and again, this leads to more challenges around making sure these things are fixed and these things are addressed. So the way we help with this is we have what we call our software vulnerability management lifecycle. Now, in principle, it's simple, but really what this is trying to do is to bring security and operations together to give you visibility to when applications become vulnerable, enabling you to patch those applications as soon as possible to reduce that risk window and to make sure that you're not at risk of exploits. And the process really is from assessment, so understanding what's out there and what's vulnerable, mitigation to actually automate the remediation of those vulnerabilities, and then closing the loop, verification, so reporting to make sure that those apps which were vulnerable no longer are, and that things are fixed and resolved. So how do we approach this? So I mentioned the Secunia Research team earlier. On a daily basis, they're tracking over 57,000 applications and looking for vulnerabilities within them. Now, they do this a number of ways. Of course, we have great relationships with vendors, and we help vendors to make sure their applications stay vulnerability-free. But we have meta-crawlers that actually are out on the dark net as well, looking for nefarious or bad activity. These guys are hacking applications and creating exploit kits and all these bad things. They're really active. They're always communicating on the dark web. We're looking out there for this information as well. And we also do our own research. So this year alone, we've identified several vulnerabilities with the Microsoft platform, for example. Things which Microsoft weren't aware of, which were vulnerable in their systems. And we've highlighted these to Microsoft, which is, of course, a great thing for our relationship with them as well. Because they want to know. They want to get them fixed before the likes of WannaCry does something bad. So with this vulnerability information, it enables us to create asset lists across our different platforms. And asset lists really are kind of watch lists. They're the things that you want to keep an eye on in your environment, your applications which are important to you. Now, as soon as a new vulnerability is identified, we automate a ticketing process to ensure that the operations team know exactly which applications are vulnerable and what needs to be done to remediate those. Now, on the desktop side, we also provide automated scanning. So we do have an agent capability as well. And this enables you to get active inventory from your estate to understand, again, what's vulnerable. And also, not just what's vulnerable, but how important is that? What's the priority of that? Is that extremely critical? Does that mean someone can attack this application remotely? Does it give them system access to my environment? So that's the kind of intelligence that we provide through this process to help really close the loop. We have automated patching, so we have lots of out-of-the-box patches. So as we're identifying these vulnerabilities, we can actually automate that patching process to get that application out into the likes of WSUS or SCCM to then address and automate this. And of course, reporting there for that verification piece, closing the loop. It's really around understanding which applications you have, which ones are vulnerable, and then automated patching to actually fix and resolve those applications. So from my side, I think that's where I'm going to take a break. And I'm going to pass over to you, Ken, and perhaps you can show the solution itself. And would you like the microphone?
Short working day?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, thanks a lot. You probably want your phone. Or you don't want to leave it with me. Rob asked about WannaCry, and while you were asking about that, I was just checking my phone here because I had a chat last Monday with a customer. I'm not going to mention any names since we're on video here, but they were hit badly by WannaCry. and it's even in the news, and they're still not operating. And that was back in, I think maybe April, something like that. That's a big international company. So it's a little scary / interesting. What I'm going to do a couple of demos. I just want to show you just one thing, because again, Rob, you mentioned the I think you called it the risk window, and that's really important to understand. The risk window is a term that we use to define the number of days where a hacker can go in and it's wide open. And the thing is, in most organizations, and I'm a consultant, so in most organizations, what I see is when we have a breach that kind of reaches the news, then my boss comes, and then my boss tells me, hey, Kent, we need to patch for this. But that breach reaches the news, many days after we actually have the vulnerability. And the same happened with Pattaya, with WannaCry. You just name drop any of them, and most likely we already had a fix for that. So from we have a vulnerability, in average, we have something like 30 days in average to fix it. That's, in those 30 days, you can feel secure, you can use your process, you can, go in and test and all of that stuff, just like we're doing with Patch Tuesday and Microsoft, and you've been doing for years. After those 30 days, that's really where, the hackers will know about this, and they will start, taking an opportunity out of this. In average, what we have seen is that it takes 186 days to actually fix those vulnerabilities internally at an organization. So that leaves a hacker with 156 days to do almost, exactly what they want to do. Now, these numbers here comes from the industry, and let's just say, okay, the industry is, they want to sell software. I mean, obviously, they want to sell us something, right? So let's just split them in two, and it's still scary. And I don't know if it's 186 days or it's 150 days, and I honestly do not care. But what I do know is having the manager being my source of vulnerability intelligence. I see that so many times, and that is dangerous. I also see organizations say, we are on Windows 10. And I was at Ignite last week. Microsoft told me if I'm on Windows 10, I don't have to worry about zero-day exploits as long as I keep up with the last, cumulative update. And Microsoft are 100% correct, but only if you have Windows 10 and nothing on top. So most of us, we don't just have the operating system, because why would you have that, right? So as soon as you start putting anything on top, then we have to know about the risk window. So my biggest challenge here as a consultant is actually to figure out, so what vulnerabilities do I have to take care of in my environment? And it's not just Java and Adobe. I wish it were, because we can deal with them. I mean, we have done that for many years. But we also need to look at all the other ones that we don't know anything about. So let me just see here if I still have a connection. So the first thing I want to show you, I just want to show you kind of the end result, because then we can talk from that. How many of you are using Configuration Manager today in your environment? WSUS. Some of you, Altiris? Okay. So, Configuration Manager, let me just talk quickly about this, because this is managing more than 80% of all the Windows devices in the world. Not consumer, but in the organization. So there is a pretty good chance that even though you didn't raise your hand, you're actually, you're still being managed by this system. So this is a well-known system. This is a system that, we're all well aware of, and we're working in here on a daily basis. If I can get, third-party updates from a vendor like Flexera in here, then I can get this into a well-known process. So I don't have to, learn about a new way of distributing updates or anything like that. And that's really the key here to me. So once I'm done with, all of my setup and configuration and what have you, I'll just get the updates in here. And some of the updates might be, applications that I know of, like Foxit Reader. Actually, not that many I know of are patching that, but it has security or vulnerabilities as well. Google Chrome, it can be, one of the 75 or 58,000 apps that Rob was talking about. So let's see how we get this in here. This is the Flexera SVM dashboard. So the dashboard is important to me because it will tell me where to focus my time. Most of us, we're just working 8 hours a day, and we have enough on our plate already. So the dashboard here, I can customize the dashboard. And the dashboard is right now just looking at the latest available patches. But that doesn't really, it doesn't really tell me, should I be focusing on, the Flash player, or should I be focusing on something else? Because I do not know if this impacts my environment. And that's kind of rule number 1 in my life. I'm super lazy, so I don't want to do work I don't have to do. I'm pretty sure you feel the same. So what I do in here is, I would go in and then I'll say, okay, so what is the most critical advisory affecting my environment? And all of a sudden, now I can start prioritizing my time, because by looking at the criticalities up here, I know, we all have a CEO. One iTunes. So this is actually looking in our demo environment. But you can see up here, I mean, these are some of, even though there might be some of the usual suspects, most organizations, they don't have a policy for patching Apple iCloud. They don't have a policy for patching Foxit Reader. You might be doing Adobe Reader, you might be doing Google, but there are a lot of others in here, and this is just a small environment. So, and the same here, I have an application called Pale Moon. I didn't even know we had that. That ties back to what you're saying. We don't really know what software we have installed. So this is, the most critical ones. If I go in here, I will also be able to see the latest advisories affecting my security. So this is typically one I would have side by side, and then I can get a warning. So there is a workflow behind this. So I can integrate this with ServiceNow if we have ServiceNow, and then it can actually automate the flow. So if we have stuff like Adobe Reader, Java, Flash, Shockwave, that stuff, I don't need to go in and create the packages manually, because we've done it so many times that we can just have a flow automating the entire process. I do not have ServiceNow integrated here, so I won't be able to demo that, but I can demo how I do it manually. But up here you can see there's something about the Git. So we have GitHub up here, and it tells me that I have 174 installations. It might not be super critical, but it's still something I would not pay attention to. And the same with, let's see if I have one further down. See, I think I had another one. Yeah, another one down here is Wireshark. So those are just 2 applications as an app administrator I wouldn't think about. I would, as I said, I would think about Adobe Reader and Java. So I use this as an eye-opener. And often when I go to management, they go like, we don't need that tool because we are already patching, all the applications. And I'm like, nope. So let's just, conduct a scan on the environment. We don't have to install anything. This is a cloud service. The only thing we have to do is just run a scan agent. We don't need to install the scan agent. And after we do that, typically management, they will understand. And at the end of the day, it's actually management responsibility. So I don't know if you heard about Equifax. So the CEO last week, he decided to resign. Probably a very good idea. If you haven't heard about it, I don't know if they operate in UK or if it's only in US.
I think there is some in the UK as well.
There is, okay, so it's like a huge scandal in the States. It would be like almost like, Rabobank here or something like that here in the Netherlands, a super trusted advisor that has personal information about half of the Dutch population if they were hacked. And it's not only that the fact that they were hacked, it was everything they did, around that event there. Okay, so the first thing for me here would be to go in and figure out, what is my vulnerability picture here? What does it look like? Once I've done that, I've integrated this with my own environment, so I can easily go in and say, okay, I have Active Directory machines and I have non-Active Directory machines. So if we're using Windows Autopilot and we have Intune and that stuff, I can still get information in here. So I can still detect insecure applications. And right here, I just have my own device. And I can look at the device details, I can look at the installed products, I can see the insecure apps that I might have. Once I realize that, hey, this is all wrong, I want to fix the issue. That's why my manager is paying me, right? So I go into patching, and when I go into patching, this tool here will show me all the available patches and not only impacting my environment, so I could actually use the tool here as a packaging tool. I don't know if that was ever the intent, but that can be done. So what I would normally do is I would go up here and then say, I only want to focus on the stuff, that is important to me. And the list shrunk. Otherwise it would be a little too interesting. So now when I have these applications, we all know, those of you who are working with applications, that it's a tedious process going in, customizing the app and doing all of that stuff. We just spent way too much time on that. So in here, I can create what is called a patch profile. The patch profile differs from application to application. So for instance, for Adobe Reader, I think it was Adobe Reader that I selected. Let's just go down here. You will be able to do the Adobe Reader customizations that you're probably using. You're using the Adobe Reader customization wizard today. So I don't want to, I want to remove end-user license agreement. I want to remove the desktop shortcut and what have you. So, so I'll just, typically go in and create my template. And one thing I've learned when dealing with third-party updates is the install option up here. That one is super important. Windows updates, they are super easy to install. We're doing that every single month, right? You can patch one, you install one update, it will place the machine in a reboot pending, then you just install the next one, and at the end, it will just restart the machine. It doesn't work like that when we are installing Adobe Reader, Apple iTunes, a GitHub component, and what have you, because those vendors, they don't talk to one another, and they're not following the same rules, and they certainly didn't read the same book. So testing in here is more difficult. And I've seen strange behavior where I couldn't upgrade iTunes for whatever reason, so I'm always performing a clean installation. So, just rip off the old version of iTunes, install the new one. Rip off the old version of Flash and Java, install the new one. Don't try to upgrade them. So I save my template, and then once I have my template, now I can just automate the process. I can also manually go in here and say, hey, I want to build the package. And once I build the package, I have a list of all my different templates down here. Now, I did create a new one, although I already had one. If I only had one template, it would just automatically select that one. But here I can go in and say, well, please go ahead, use this template, and build the package. So now the package is being download it from Flexera, and it will be customized, and you'll have that package. You can just download the package now, and then you can distribute it. So you'll be able to distribute it manually. You can add it into Alteryx, to SCCM, to whatever system you have. Of course, I don't want to do that. I want to go in and use my existing environment. So when I go to my deployment here, let's just see if I can. Is this one here? Oh, that's the reason why. See where we are. There you are. So when I go to my deployment here and get a list of my packages, I couldn't see this one here before because I was zoomed 120%. I don't know if you can read this, but this one here says publish selected packages. So now what it will do is it will just publish, inject it into WSUS, and in WSUS, you can just distribute them directly if you're using a standalone WSUS, or if you have SCCM integrated with WSUS, which most of you probably have, you'll just use, your standard patch management routines in SCCM. So by publishing these, it's going to ask me where do I want to publish it, and I just want to publish it to the root here. Then from here on, it's business as usual. So in SCCM, what I would do is I would go in and configure my, there you are, configure my site here and say, well, when you look at software updates, then besides looking at, the normal products, I really also want you to look at, these vendors here. So I have Flexera SVM, and in here it will just add in the vendors. Don't look at the individual vendors I have on top. That's because this is also my pilot demo environment, so I've had some really early builds of this. But that's the only thing I have to do, and I just have to do this once. So I just select Flexera here. It will automatically appear, and then from here on, it'll just synchronize those updates. And once I have them in here, once I have the data within SCCM, then we can start doing, all the fancy stuff. So if I look at this is a service that we provide. We call it Insight Analytics. So once I have this, then you can see here, I can mix and match my my SCCM data, with Flexera data. So how does it look, in terms of insecure applications? How many clients do I have out there with insecure applications? And you might have, done, or you have done the scanning using Flexera's tool, but the deployments, now you're in the mercy of SCCM. So maybe the deployments, maybe as I look here, I'm only 50% compliant on my third-party deployments that I have within SCCM. Why is that? There can be a ton of reasons. But if you do not visualize it, then you will have a hard time troubleshooting it. So here I'm just looking at some of the reasons, Well, you still have a couple of devices hanging with a reboot pending. So maybe you did a good job, but your manager do not allow you to reboot the machines during work hours. That's very common. I hear that all the time, Our users are precious, they're special, we don't want to, disrupt them. And I go like, so you rather disrupt your entire business? Because that, at the end of the day, is what's going to happen. It could also be that, the number of clients you have, you only have 80% active clients. And 80% active clients, I don't know if that's good or bad, because it really depends on, what was it last week and the month before that. So if 80% is, that's what you have, then 80% might be okay. So what I can do here is, let's see, no, it's just trying to go on-prem to my own environment. What I can do here is I can start looking at my trend here. So, your client activity, it looks like 80% for me is okay. And that's very important because as we try to patch for, WannaCry or one of the other ones, I can bet you that the business, they want 100%. But how are you going to go to 100%, if you only have 80% active clients? So you're chasing ghosts, you're spending a ton of time, and it's not doing you any good. So being able to see all of this, side by side, that really helps me a lot. And if I wanna, I think up here, and I cheated, so we are not just 36% compliant on the WannaCry. Trust me, you wanna be 100%. But if you can't see this, if you don't know how many healthy clients you have, if you don't know how many active clients you have, and with Flexera, we are using the normal patch infrastructure. So if you don't know whether or not your patch infrastructure, your Windows Update Agent, your WSUS server, all of that good stuff, if you don't know that you're 100% compliant here, there's no way you're ever going to achieve 100%, WannaCry or Pataya compliance. So that's kind of super important. And that's one of the things I really like about working with Flexera. I'm not saying that just because Rob is standing here looking at me, but I can take the data here, put them into an environment that I know. So once it's in SCCM, I can treat this as any other update. But in SCCM, I don't have the dashboard that I have up here. So I'm unable to prioritize my work. I don't know which updates I should actually patch first. And that's super important. And that takes me back to my fantastic drawing here, my risk window. Because you need to understand this. And if you don't understand it, then you're over here, when your boss hears about it, on CNN or whatever channel we have, we're looking at, then it's way too late. And I hate not being in control. And the first 30 days, or let's say 45 days, I don't know, but then in here I'm in control. So from I have the insecure detection, then I'm in control. I can test. I have, my week, my 2 weeks, my 3 weeks, and then, just go ahead and patch it. After that, it starts to become a little interesting. I don't know about time. We had like 45 minutes, right?
We did. We got 5 minutes, so we can take some questions.
Yeah. So any questions? You can ask them in Dutch. I don't speak Dutch, but then I will just give you a random answer. Yeah.
The dashboard we are seeing here is part of the same software.
No. So the dashboard that I'm showing here, that's part of that's a product that we have, and I'm from a company called CT Global, but it integrates with Flexera, and I find the integration like super important, because they can go out and detect, these are the vulnerabilities that impact your environment, but what they don't detect is they don't look at, how many machines do you have in a reboot pending, how well did the deployment go. So they will give you a number and say, okay, now you still have 121 installation left out there. But when you have an SCCM environment, there are 1,000 things that can go wrong. So that's where this dashboard here comes in. And it can much more than just, show you about security. Every little aspect of SCCM plus more we can visualize. So for instance, down here, just looking at the number of blue screens we have had, the number of applications that are crashing. So that's all super important when we talk about, client health and happy end users. That was a good question. Yeah. Other questions? Any of you impacted by WannaCry, Pataya? Don't raise your hands. Nope. No, we don't use computers. Yeah. We got a I wouldn't say a ton of calls, but we got a lot of calls those 2 weeks. And some of the organizations, they were like, we don't have any domain controllers left. We don't have, anything at all. We need, and one of them asked about, do you have 15 students that can just run around with USB sticks? That's where we are. So we're just trying to call my daughter because she's going to university and say, hey, do you have 14 of your friends?
I'm there right now.
Oh, you are? Yeah, you want to? I mean, they're done. So if I have 15 students, if you want, and they have new sneakers and everything. but that's, I mean, we might be laughing at it, but it will kill a business. And the transport company that I was talking about, where I didn't mention the name, they're still not fully operating. They couldn't deliver packages. And when you cannot deliver a package as a transport company, that's kind of your core business there. In Denmark, we have another huge enterprise called Maersk. You probably know about Maersk Line. And they got hit like really, really bad. Last I looked, it was like millions and millions of lost revenue. They didn't know where the ships were. They didn't know, they couldn't do anything. Yeah, that's not funny. So, any other questions? Otherwise, you will be at the booth all day?
I certainly will, so feel free to come to our booth. And the one thing we do need to do, actually, is just go back to my slide deck. There's a session code at the end as well. So please put your feedback on that, fill in the form, and I believe there's going to be a draw at the end of the day for some kind of prize as well.
Okay, let me just show the last one here then. Here you are.
Super. Well, thank you all very much for your time.
Yeah, enjoy the event.